This essay example, as well as thousands of others, is available in text format on our website for free and without registration. Simply Google Ivy Panda Free Essays.
Introduction. The evolution of human rights can be traced back to 18th century activism, in which the gaps in the legal recognition and definite consciousness of human rights were narrowed. History indicates that human rights are not granted by the state, rather, human rights are attained through struggle and challenge to the existing authority. The current legal recognition of human rights attainment originated from various declarations, and the most pronounced included the Magna Carta Declaration in the 13th century that curtailed the royal powers, the American Declaration of Independence in 1776, and the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizens in 1789. The stated declarations were some of the major revolutionary achievements toward attaining the current legal recognition of universal human rights. However, the current meaning of universal human rights is derived from the typologies of rights that were established after the formation of the United Nations following the Second World War. The United Nations Convention of 1948 established the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or UDHR, which fundamentally defined the central ideas applicable to all human rights. While the current UDHR is a declaration rather than a formal treaty, it forms the foundation of human rights. The rights of an individual and the limits of the state are fundamentally based on the declaration. Following the negotiations on the importance of economic rights and civil and political rights, the United Nations General Assembly in 1966 came up with a treaty that legally bound all human rights into two aspects. The first aspect is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, or ICCPR, and the second aspect is the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, or ICESCR. The 1966 treaty produced the legally binding declarations that formed the foundation of the current human rights structure. Besides, the rights that were internationally agreed upon and put into legally binding treaties were largely borrowed from the UDHR. As indicated, the UDHR is not a binding legal document. However, it is universally applied such that it attained the status of customary law that is binding. Together with the 1966 International Treaty on Human Rights, the rights contained in the documents can be categorized into three groups, namely the three generations of human rights. Civil and political rights, first-generation rights. The first-generation rights contain both individual rights and the limitations of the state on these rights. Most of these rights relate to liberty and include the fundamental right to life. All the individual rights related to self-determination, including freedom from discrimination, slavery, torture, and political participation. Also included is the freedom of conscience, opinion, expression, thought, and assembly. Even though these rights and freedoms have been granted through universal suffrage, they remain in theory rather than practice. Most states do not grant the freedoms fully as contained within the legal treaties. Economic and social rights, second-generation rights. The second-generation rights are related to the economic, social, and cultural security of individuals. The rights relate directly to the individual and are seen as supplements to basic human rights. The state has to provide the necessary incentives to ensure that the rights are protected and enjoyed by the individuals. All the rights relate to the social and economic well-being of individuals, such as the right to education, healthcare, and social amenities. Environmental, cultural, and developmental rights, third-generation rights. The third-generation rights relate to environmental concerns, political and socio-economic developments. Under these rights, an individual is obligated to stay in a protected and clean environment, as well as the freedom to individual cultural, political, and economic endeavors. The role of the state is to ensure that the living conditions of the citizens are within the precincts of the rights and that the social, political, and economic developments are geared toward improving the livelihoods of the individuals. The evolution of the rights and freedoms. The categorization of human rights into first, second, and third generations follows the traditional method of grouping the fundamental rights depending on their chronological evolution. The first-generation rights emerged from the 18th and 19th century struggle for liberation from the oppressed totalitarian rules that characterized the state authority. The first-generation rights such as freedom of conscience, speech, and political participation emerged during this period. Industrialization gave rise to increased inequalities, and against the backdrop of the view of the state's roles given the free political space, the need for social and economic equality was articulated. The socio-economic rights emerged during the industrialization periods when the majority struggled to attain economic and social equality as well as against the oppressing labor regulations. With increased globalization and responsiveness to environmental and socio-economic concerns such as extreme poverty in some places, third-generation rights were formulated. The third-generation rights such as the right to self-determination have been adopted as a result of the challenges the world is facing currently, including environmental concerns, extreme poverty, and lack of appropriate healthcare facilities. The third-generation rights were formulated as a solution to most of these challenges. This essay on 3 generations of human rights development was written and submitted by a student just like you. The IvyPanda Samples database hosts thousands of works similar to this one on various subjects. Visit ivypanda.com to find what you are looking for, free of charge.